everyone, welcome to this week's episode of I've Been Playing. Today we're talking about Remnant from the Ashes. This, I believe, has been on Xbox Game Pass for quite a while, but I haven't picked it up there, surprisingly enough. I actually got it as the PS Plus free game of the month. That's where I picked it up, and you can also find it on the PC. Remnant from the Ashes is one of the many Souls-inspired or Souls-like or Soulsborne-esque, whatever and however you want to classify them, one of those types of games, and it borrows very heavily. You can very heavily tell the influences. I would almost say it's more like Bloodborne because there's a lot of emphasis on gun combat, and in fact I think I probably use my guns more than I use my melee weapons. Although my melee weapons are pretty awesome, I've got to say there's some pretty cool designs for weapons in this, but I definitely rely more heavily on my guns. So although I didn't rely on it in Bloodborne, but the combination of the two is what makes me think more Bloodborne than anything else. There's also a bit of Destiny. I think I haven't played Destiny for myself. I have watched some gameplay of it, but there is some Destiny inspiration as well, specifically in the fact that it can be multiplayer. Now, I haven't been playing it multiplayer, so I don't know how many people you can get in a group at once to fight things. It is definitely meant to be multiplayer. I wouldn't say it's something that's forced on you. As I said, I've been playing solo, and it's been going mostly fine. We'll get into that in a little bit, a little more depth soon, but it's definitely meant to be played co-op, and there are some reasons and ways you can tell that. So as with any RPG or Souls-like or online RPG kind of game, you do get to pick your own character class, essentially, at the start of the game. So right now I'm playing as an ex-cultist, which is kind of built, according to the game, for mid-range combat. I started with a pistol and a shotgun and an axe, I believe, and that is their idea of the mid-range combat thing. I also started with the healing mod for one of my guns, so it's definitely meant to be the healer of the group. I think there are 3 different ones, 3 or 4, which leads me to believe that your group online, if you were playing online co-op, would probably be 3 people, maybe 4, don't know for sure. Like I said, I never got into an online game, and I've been doing basically fine on my own. I don't really play multiplayer that much, not very often, so it's going okay, as is. But I would guess it's 3 or 4 people co-op if you're online. And of course you can upgrade both of those, and again this works very similarly to a Dark Souls game. You have the things you need to collect, upgrade them to a certain level, although unlike Dark Souls or any of the Soulsborns I can think of, you can go up past 10, so up to 10 you need certain, I think you need just basic iron, and then after 10 you need more specialized iron and things like that. You can also upgrade or craft your own mods and sometimes weapons. The bosses will drop specific items that you can make boss weapons out of, which is again very similar. I hate to compare something to Dark Souls, but when it's this heavily inspired and influenced by it, it's very hard not to. But you collect those items around the world. You can also upgrade, so the way you heal is dragon hearts, I think they're called, and you start out with 3 of them in the beginning of the game, and you have to collect items for somebody. Once you save her or find her in the game, she will upgrade the number you have. I don't think she upgrades the effectiveness, I think it just does that on its own as you kind of level stuff up. Or there's a trait you unlock. I think you have traits and you earn them as you play the game, and as you play the game in specific ways, it looks like to me, specific traits unlock. So I think one of the traits eventually is medical effectiveness or medicine effectiveness, stuff like that, so you can earn that trait. But the way you upgrade how many you have is to collect certain items, and one of them is called a simulacrum, which are very rare. They tend to be on bodies around the world, and it seems like there aren't very many around. So you definitely want to keep an eye out for those and be sure to not accidentally sell them. I haven't done that. I know it sounds like I have, but I very nearly did, and then I was like, oh god, no, I want to save this so I can get more healing items, especially where I was having a very tough time. Overall, so far, I have been enjoying it, even though, as I said, I'm playing solo, and sometimes it is very obvious that it's meant to be a multiplayer game, generally based on how many enemies are around. And again, I said this earlier, we will get into that. It did take a little while for me to get into. It was a little hard to get used to playing. It was tough at first. I wasn't quite sure what was going on. The enemies were quite difficult. I was a bit overwhelmed sometimes, and there was one boss in particular and there are several bosses that feel like this, but one of the earlier bosses was extremely difficult because it kept splitting into more and more little things. I think it splits into 8. It starts as one thing, and then it splits into 2, and then it split, and it was awful. But I realized I left there and I went somewhere else, and I was able to upgrade a little more, and I was able to take out a couple other bosses, because for the most part, it kind of guides you through. It's a little less open-ended, mostly than a lot of Dark Souls games. There's not as much wandering. It feels like you're wandering, but I find, especially the farther I've gotten in the game, you think you can wander around, but there is very much one path that it wants you to take, and it does a pretty good job of leading you that way most of the time. So I went elsewhere to another dungeon and defeated like a dead-end dungeon, and I defeated another boss. I got a special boss weapon, and that specific boss weapon helped a hell of a lot with that fight, and I was finally able to get through it. So there is definitely a learning period, especially, as I said, if you're playing solo, because it does kind of feel like it's built around expecting you to have not just one person there. The other boss, one of the bosses I just defeated, and I'm not going to get into the story for various reasons, and just, I don't want to spoil anything. If you didn't want to see any of the bosses, I probably should have recommended leaving. But one of the bosses I just defeated was some bug thing called like Ixalis or something like that, and it was the worst, and it probably was the most obvious point to me where they wanted you to have more than one person, because a lot of the boss fights in this have more than one enemy, or they have the boss can spawn many enemies, and it would be really nice for crowd control to have more than one person, and almost every boss fight, I think, if not every single boss fight, has had that. I don't want to say issue, because it's obviously designed that way, and it's designed to have multiple people taking on multiple vantage points and multiple enemies and being able to kind of flank more than one person can do, because one person can't flank anything. But that one in particular, there's one on each side of you, they spawn a bunch of things that attack you, and they're really hard to shoot, and you're on a bridge, and it's just a mess. It took me so long, but it was one of those things where I'm like, I'm not gonna let this boss defeat me. I'm annoyed, I'm getting closer and closer to finishing it, and it's one of those, I finally beat it at like 1:30 in the morning after at least an hour of trying, and it was one of those boss fights where you get to the end of it and you're not even like excited, it's just exhausting and you're done. So I think one of my complaints, I don't have very many, but one of my complaints would be that I hate bosses that spawn multiple things, and I don't care if you're supposed to be a multiplayer game or not. I hate them because they suck. There was another one, and I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it did this spawning multiple enemies thing, and it had multiple levels that it would fight on, and it would sometimes jump up into the ceiling, and that one wasn't that difficult, except when I lost the boss completely, which I did a couple of times. But that one wasn't that bad, except for the fact that there were multiple levels. Like, it's why multiple levels and multiple enemies and an enemy that can climb up the walls and into the ceiling and jump off. Oh, that was frustrating. My only other complaint, now that I'm farther into the game, would be that the movement feels very sluggish and slow, sometimes like a little bit like walking through molasses. Sometimes the button presses and the animations, like, they don't work immediately, or they don't go as quickly as you think they do. And there is another trait that you can unlock for your character that does make the consumable item speed, like use speed, faster, which is nice, and I think, from what I can tell, it also helps with the health item consumption speed, because let me tell you, the character is not on top of it when they're trying to heal themselves. They're just like, la la la, I'm just gonna pull this thing out, and it's not like I have 3 giant butterfly monsters trying to attack me. No, I'll just nonchalantly slow to a walk and then try to eat it. And then you die, because they have no sense of urgency. So that's annoying. But I am finding it really fun. I am finding myself wanting to keep playing and keep moving on and keep moving on. It's one of those things where you're like, I'll just do one more area, I'll just clear out one more area, I'll just clear out one more boss, I'll just find one more NPC to talk to, I'll just do this one more objective. Now that I know what I'm doing, now that I know how the game works, I really can spend a lot of time in it just all in a row and just have a lot of fun killing things, I guess, basically. I have a lot of upgraded weapons now. I think one of my weapons is upgraded to 14, one of them's like 12, one of them's 11, I have a bunch of armor upgrades, and I don't want to say it's easy, because it's not necessarily easier, especially since it's really easy to get swarmed sometimes, because, okay, gonna go on a tangent here. There's a crouch button, okay, but I don't see what the point of crouching is, because even when I was trying to crouch, even when I was trying to sneak and sneak up on things, they would still sense me, and as soon as one enemy senses me in an area, like, everyone within a 20-mile radius, it seems like, knows where I am and kind of chases you across the map, because, I don't know, they hear the combat, I guess, or something. So I don't see what the point of the sneak button is if I can't actually like it doesn't help, or I get maybe one sneak attack on them and then they can see me and then it makes a noise and everyone can see me in the general vicinity, so there's no real point. I guess it is nice that it does make a noise when an enemy senses you, but you don't always know where it is or which one it is or where it's going to come from. So I don't see the point. Why even have a crouch and sneak button if it's clearly not going to help me? But as I've said, I've been having quite a lot of fun with it. It does take a little while to get into. I feel like the first area that you start in is kind of the one that's the least... It's not linear in any part of it, but I feel like the first part is the least linear because there are several little dungeon areas that you can go into that are kind of dead ends that I don't think are necessarily things you need to do, although they do help with leveling. As I said, with that one enemy, I had to go back to another one of those other little dead end dungeons and get that done. But a lot of the stuff that I've done more recently, it's kind of like you have multiple routes, but there are locked doors, as is the case with Dark Souls. So you try to go through them in one direction and you can't, so you kind of have to go through. And it guides you really well. It guides you really well through the area to get all the things you need to move on to the next area if you need to do that, because there was one section that I had to get a key to open this giant tower, like this amazing looking tower. It was like a Star Destroyer, like stuck straight up in the air in the desert. It was amazing, but I had to go through 2 or 3 other dungeons, I think, to get the key for that, and it led me very well in a loop because it led me in one direction because I couldn't get the other way, and it led me through all the bosses that it needed to, looped back around on itself, and spat me out right next to the tower once I had the key. So that was really nice. I do appreciate that sort of level design. I've been having a lot of fun with it, just playing on my own. It may be easier for some people to play in a group if you can get a group of people. As I said, I don't know how many people you can have in a group, probably 3, possibly 4, don't know. That's something to look into if you want to play it with friends. It may be easier that way. I'm not finding it especially hard. Again, as I said, other than kind of those 2 bosses that were the hardest for me. But most of the time I beat them fairly quickly, 1 or 2 tries, maybe 5. And it's just a lot of fun. It's a decent Souls-like game. But let me know what you think in the comments. Have you tried this game out for yourself? Do you think you'll give it a go? Are you a Soulsborne person, or are you just gonna... does that immediately turn you off playing the game? Well, or maybe you're not a multiplayer person, in which case this probably, I mean, this doesn't matter. Like I said, you can play it solo, so don't write it off for that reason. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and remember that I've been playing every Monday, so if you want to see my thoughts on any other games, any console games that I've been playing, and want to hear more, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.